Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Business Growth on Purpose. And I'm Jose Palomino, your host. And today I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts around what's going on in the world today. So clearly, as this is being recorded, we're in the midst of global pressures of all kinds coming out of what we hope is coming out of the pandemic, and also then seeing war break out and energy costs going through the roof. And by the way, it's not just energy, it's materials. Anything that uses petroleum in its base, of course, is going up in price, creating all kinds of uncertainty. And so just when we thought, 2 years ago, I guess March of 2020, where uncertainty really struck a lot of businesses, and we're thinking, well, how much more uncertain can we get? We're in a very uncertain world right now, a lot of things up in the air. And if you're the owner or operator of a B2B business, you're right now at a kind of a crossroads of making some key decisions. Is this the time to invest, to double down, as it were? Is it the time to maybe not launch a new product, or maybe to launch a new product or service? And I know over the last 2 years, a lot of you listening to this, you may have had a great 2 years, which is counterintuitive, but the kind of business you were in actually benefited from the crisis environment. I often observe, and it's just interesting to me how many used car dealers all of a sudden think they became marketing geniuses because of some macro factors. So that's really the issue here in this episode. I just want you to grab hold of this thought, and that is simply this: that you have to see what's going on as is it something you're doing? Is it something that's going on in the world outside of you that's like above your pay grade? There's nothing you could really do to make it happen more or less, right? So unless you're actually expert at negotiating world peace, you can't do much about the current crises. And then really think about, okay, if I can't actually influence those things, how do I navigate them? So I often like to think about business, especially smaller businesses, as being, sailboats at sea. You cannot control the waves. You can't control the weather. You can only control your salesmanship, so to speak, how good you are at managing your boat, directing it to safe harbor, managing yourself in times of storms. Those are all things that are good to inventory. So start thinking about that in these terms. What is your financial flexibility like? Have you really talked to your bank lately? Do you know where you stand in terms of your credit facilities and what might be available to you? What's your cash flow like? I've seen businesses that sometimes, over time, especially if they deal with much bigger companies, have kind of settled into a new normal that they're not going to get paid for 60, 90, sometimes even 120 days. Is any of that negotiable? Especially in a time of tight supply chains, it could be that if you can deliver, that can be in exchange for maybe not that much higher margins, but maybe for better cash flow terms. So those are things you need to explore. And then think about your team. Is your team in place and going to stay in place? Meaning, are people, do you have a stable workforce? And sometimes the most stable part of your workforce are the people you kind of wish maybe would think about other opportunities elsewhere so you can upgrade, but they're kind of on the border. They're good enough, but not great. And I've just seen through the many, many years and many examples of working with lots of businesses and business owners that I've rarely, and I can't even remember a time where an owner felt they let go of somebody too soon. But I have seen many cases of people realizing they let go of somebody or let somebody go who kind of was leaning in that direction too late. They hung on to the hope that they would turn the situation around. And frankly, didn't turn the situation around. Doesn't always work that way. So think about personnel. Think about, first think about finances, think about personnel, then think about your position in the marketplace. Are you really differentiated enough from your competitors? And this is a perfect time right now because service levels, being able to deliver at all, it's a really great time to think about maybe there's some other ways to package what we do. Maybe there's some other ways to think about our offering, some fresh ideas that we can inject in it. Now, if you're actually in a business that's benefited from some of the macro trends, and you're riding that, you may be tempted to expand, say, well, I'm just going to start hiring a lot more people, or I'm going to get some more square footage. I'm going to buy some new machines. And I'm not saying that isn't right. I mean, expansion is something you have to do if you're going to grow your business, but make sure you're not doing that on the basis of something that's short-term versus long-term, especially if you're going to have to make long-term bets based on what's happening right now. Now, does that mean you might lose out on some opportunities? Maybe. So I know, fortune favors the bold and all of that. And as entrepreneurs, we often get caught up in that kind of martial, let's win at all costs kind of mentality. And it's easy to rah-rah yourself into that. And I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying just really size up the changes in the marketplace that are undergirding your decision-making. Ask yourself and ask some other people, are these things likely to last for the long term? So again, I alluded to used car dealer, and I have nothing against used car dealers per se. I've bought used cars before, but think in terms of, is this the time to like double your lot, or just be thankful that you can actually move the product you have and the margins you have right now, because it won't last forever, not likely. So those are things you have to think about as you look out as far as trends is concerned. So finances, people, and plant, right? Like, just, do you need to expand that? And then product, of course, do you have the right product set, the right product mix? Are there some opportunities to experiment with some things there? And then always look at your overall positioning, your value proposition. Is it really fresh? Now, let's say you're facing these times, these last couple of years, and it hasn't favored you. It's actually worked against you. Well, that's a tough thing to deal with, especially since it's macro and it's things that really you didn't have direct control over. So the real issue then is saying, what do you do about it? So if you've done all the other checkbox things about, money and plant and people and so on, but really think about, okay, what are the problems? What are the challenges that your best customers are facing that they would welcome, appreciate, and be thankful for? Some company who could solve that problem. Have you looked at their problems? Do you understand their problems? And so often when we look at strategy, we always start not inside the companies we're working with, but we ask them to look at the companies they work with. What's really going on in your customers? If you're fuzzy on that, especially in a period of such tumult, and by the way, we've already gone through the Great Recession, and we've seen other major tumult and changes, and it's like every 5-6 years. So and I know it's trite and it's cliche that the only constant is change, but there's a great truth to that. And so you have to say, as a business, are we responding to change? Because this is not going to be over. I mean, the conflict might be over, the pandemic may eventually be over, but something else will happen, because the world's a very complex place. And it's hard to predict. It's I think, harder to predict than the weather. There are that many more variables, because humans are a variable and human behavior is a variable. How generational changes. We're seeing things happen with video and how people are meeting one another and how people consume information and the generational shifts there. So really think about what's going on in your customers so that you can actually address that in some meaningful way, in a way that they would appreciate. And that might be a different level of service, something else you do for them. It could be as simple as just following up after the delivery intentionally, each and every order, and saying, how did that order arrive? Is there anything we could have done different or better for you? Did you like the way we packaged that? And I may seem so basic, but it's possible you might be the only one who does that. And also you learn something when they tell you, well, actually, we wouldn't mind if you could package it 6 to a box instead of 7, because it makes it easier for us on the loading dock, or whatever that thing is. So think about your customers first as you navigate change, so you can adapt to what they need, what they would appreciate, and what they will value from you. So big topic, not attempting to exhaustively examine it, but just to say, during times of change, there's a couple of checklist things that you should be looking at regularly to make sure you're equipped to either exploit the opportunities that might be unique to your industry, to your type of business, or mitigate the challenges that also may be unique to what's going on in your world, so that you can actually think about, as we like to talk about, your business growth on purpose. It doesn't happen to you. And yes, there are externalities that you cannot control, but just like that sailor at sea, you have a lot to say as to whether or not you make it to port safely. So to your success, this is Jose Palomino signing off.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Business Growth on Purpose. If you like the show, hit subscribe and leave us a review to help other people find the podcast. And if you're ready to take the next step in driving intentional growth for your business, come check out what we're doing at valueprop.com. We've developed industry-leading programs and systems to help B2B owners take control of their growth. Until then, thanks for listening to another episode of Business Growth on Purpose.